Is teamwork a thing of the past? Have we become so disconnected and detached that we've forgotten the power of human connection in our daily lives, especially where we spend most of our time at work? My guest today, CEO of Reflection Point, Kowal Smith, challenges us to equip employees with the skills needed to lead organizations through unprecedented levels of change. It's more than technical skills. 9 of the top 10 skills in the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report are essential reasoning and critical thinking skills, including creative thinking, curiosity, empathy, and active listening. Join us in this 2-part episode as we discuss what it means to be an effective leader and colleague in Part 1, and how storytelling builds bridges in Part 2. This is E3, Engage and Empower with Empathy. Welcome to the show today, Anne. How are you doing? It's nice to see you.
It's lovely to see you, Rebecca, and thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm really excited about this conversation because I think this is going to be a unique episode, one that is not like the typical episodes I record on E3. And actually, before we dive into the content of the dialogue, I just want to let my listeners know how we connected to begin with, because I think it's a really cool story. For those of you who listened to the episode I recorded with Warren Stone, he actually, I sent him the edited recording of his episode before it went live, like I always do with all my guests. And he responded in an email with a link to an article written by a McKinsey consultant. And it was an interview with Dr. Jamil Zaki at Stanford, talking about empathy in the workplace. And I immediately smiled when I opened the article because I've read all of Dr. Zaki's books. They're on my bookshelf behind me. Huge fan. And I also recorded a book remix with his latest book, Hope for Cynics. I was covering his book and another author's book. So I got excited when I opened the article and read it. But then at the very end of the article, the McKinsey consultant references you, Anne, and your business, Reflection Point. And of course, because I'm innately curious and always love learning about other people and what they do, went to your website, went to your LinkedIn profile, did some background research on you. And I was like, this woman is amazing. I need to reach out to her and learn more about what she does. And so here we are today. I truly believe the universe brings people together in really strange and mysterious ways. And it's for a reason. I feel like we're meant to be here together today because I think there's a lot that we can share with all of you, with all of the listeners today on really what it means to be empathic in the workplace and create team dynamics that are really strong and healthy. So anyway, that's the background story. But let's talk a little bit about, so you're a Forbes contributor, and you've written a lot of articles in Forbes, and you actually published a fun one a few weeks ago around the holidays. I loved the title, How the Grinch Stole Teamwork and How to Get It Back. And you reference the extraordinarily low levels of disengagement leaders are experiencing with employees across all business sectors. And the solution to this seems to have been return to office policies. Let's bring everyone back in the office. We're experiencing face-to-face again. We're going to collaborate again, and everyone's going to be happy, right? But is this really addressing the root cause of what Gallup is calling the Great Detachment? Or are leaders just treating the symptoms? So tell us a little bit more about your reflections in that article and what made you decide to write it to begin with.
No, absolutely. So first of all, the question is fantastic. Are leaders just treating the symptoms? And I would push back and say, I'm not sure leaders are treating anything at all, right? I don't think they're treating the symptoms or the cause, because we are living in a world that is heavily polarized, that has been beset with fears relating to new technology and AI. We obviously, through the pandemic, discovered that we had to force ourselves into a different way of working. And lo and behold, it turned out to be a pretty powerfully productive way of working for a lot of people. And all of a sudden, we're finding ourselves at this crossroads where you have a group of people who want to go back in time to a workplace that doesn't exist anymore, and others who want to say, no, this is something that we need to be continuing the trajectory of redefining, right? You may recall in the early days of the pandemic, we kept talking about a new normal. We were going to have a new normal. And the new normal isn't a return to the old normal. It never is. It's where are we today? What do we need today? What does that look like? So I think what's happening in teams is there's so many curveballs that are coming into the mix because of all of these qualifications, right? This, are you working at home? Are you not working at home? Are you being seen or are you not being seen? Is your camera on? Is your camera off? The ways in which we have to engage with each other have so turned upside down that instead of saying, okay, now let's figure out where we are and try to discover a new way of working that's going to be effective for everybody, including technology that's now our partners, in addition to being just the tools that we use. But instead, I think there's a group of people who are saying, no, 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 we got to go back. We got to go back. We got to go back to a day when everybody met at some mythical water cooler. Well, last time I checked, everybody in the younger generations is carrying a water bottle, not drinking from a water cooler, right?
That's
So
true.
right off the bat, there's a mixed metaphor in there. We're looking at, how do we get people to sit around a table instead of sitting around a computer or using technology in a way that is meaningful? And then how do we actually shift the way we do our work so that we can bring in some of the new technologies? And, we're sitting at the cusp of incredible opportunity to reshape and redefine what teams are. But it's all so much framed in the negative, right? There's no more attention to diversity and inclusion. There's no attention to what helps people work better, especially for young working mothers, for example, who are incredibly productive, but sometimes need to work very different hours. And I remember those days, those days really well, right? So I think if we are sitting at a time when we have the tools and we have the ability and we have the know-how to change the way we work, and all we want to do is knee jerk back to an old way, it's no wonder that people feel disaffected, disengaged, disillusioned, disappointed.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because I'm actually rereading a book that I found really useful last year when I was leading change management called Immunity to Change.
That's a great book. Yeah.
And what you're saying reminds me of that. It's like we are our internal immune system is we have this fear and anxiety of what it will take to actually reshape the way we work in the workplace. So therefore our immune system is combating against that, thinking it's a virus or something. And so we're just reverting back to the old way of doing things. For leaders out there who are open to change and seeing what that new workplace culture could look like, I recommend you pick up the book Immunity to Change because I think that it'll really help you dig deep in exploring why you're having this knee-jerk reaction to just go back to the old ways of doing things. So I think it's just human instinct, right? It's like, oh, this is what we know.
Yeah.
So this is what we should cling to. And
We know it's safe over there. Yeah.
it's very safe, yes.
Yeah.
Even though we're getting a lot of pushback.
Absolutely. Lots of push. I just saw this morning that, yet another, I think it's JP Morgan that's now going to bring all their people back to, the way Amazon did. And I think there's this tremendous disruption. The RTO is a huge piece of it, but then also all these layoffs are a huge piece too. There's so many ways in which work has become a very disappointing idea in the last several years. And I think we need to reframe it completely. And it's about rolling up our sleeves, leaders and teams together, right? Rolling up our sleeves and saying, what's unique about our work? What do we need? When do we need to be in person? When can we work separately and be really productive? How do we give each other grace when we need a little bit of time and energy? And then how do we engage with each other when the ways that we engage have expanded to include, some in person and some virtual?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that actually dovetails really nicely into the next question I had for you, around this whole general workplace disillusionment. Let's talk about people who lead people specifically. According to LinkedIn's Workforce Confidence Index survey that was published recently, just 1/3 of individual contributors want to become people managers. And I think this is highly reflective of the younger generation as well. We're seeing Gen Z and even millennials just kind of shying away from people manager roles. And I think, unfortunately, the layoffs that are happening in the workplace are also contributing to that lack of want because a lot of the middle layer of the organization, the middle management roles are being cut. So, people are thinking, well, why would I get promoted into this role when, eventually I could be eliminated or, I'm getting double the workload. One of the main reasons people are shying away from these roles is work-life balance. So they're seeing this substantial uptick in workload by taking on a people manager role. But then another reason people are shying away from these roles is they feel like they're losing touch with their original craft.
Mm-hmm.
They're let's say they're in a marketing role and they're used to writing and publishing the social media posts and actually doing the content creation, and then they move to a marketing director role, and all of a sudden they've lost touch with that work that they love to do. So they're worried about losing touch with that. But I personally feel the best people managers are the ones who love people, love taking care of people and developing and building a team, but also they're super happy about getting in the trenches with their employees as well. So they're familiar with their craft. And if someone's out on leave or something, they can just dive right in, just like they're one of the team
Yeah.
and be a part of it. What are we doing wrong? How do you think organizations should really re-inspire and reinvigorate people to want to lead people again?
Such a great question, because my brain's going in 75 different directions right now. But I think the thing that bubbles up to the surface for me as being the most powerful observation that I've made in the last few years is even the way we think about what leadership really is. We train leaders by pulling them away from their teams, putting them together with other leaders. That's nice, right? They have a cohort of peers, and then giving them concepts around what does leadership mean and how do you think about it. But what we don't really teach people to do is how to have difficult conversations, how to tackle something that's challenging with a team in real time, in the moment. And so I think one of the things that I feel particularly passionate about is that leadership doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a collective of which the leader is part of a team. And together they need to be learning those principles of leading a team and managing a team and distributing responsibility and distributing cognition. Because look, we're living in a day when no one person has all the answers, right? So I think the workforce was designed at a time when the leader knew something and their responsibility was just to sort of help the people underneath them to do that work and support what they already knew needed to happen, right? But there's so many uncertainties, there's so many new things coming our way that we don't necessarily have the skills that everybody on our team has, right? So you need to lean on somebody in a trusting way. You have to have total respect for what they can do. You need to empower them to be able to do the kinds of things that you might not yourself be able to do. And that's scary, right? It's scary
Yeah.
because what if something goes wrong? How do you analyze it? How do you help them to be better? How do you give them feedback? And these are things that we haven't really helped leaders learn how to do. We've just given them these sort of concepts of leadership and said, if you've got vulnerability, if you've got a little bit of humility, if you're good at laughing at things, you're going to be a great leader. Go and do it. Right. And it doesn't work that way at all. You have to sort of learn in the trenches with your team. And so I know we're going to talk a little bit about the work that I do further on in the conversation, but a big piece of being an effective leader is really being able to master a set of collective skills that you can lead and shepherd and encourage your team to have. So it's about listening with humility. It's about really asking each other great questions. It's about challenging your assumptions and knowing that one person isn't going to be right. And that if I offer up an idea and you have a way of building in that idea, well, what we have is a win-win, not an attack of my idea or my person because you've come up with some better way of thinking about it, right? So these are things that are really, really hard to do. And they're scary. They're scary in the sense that, people are afraid of crossing the wrong person. They're afraid of having those conflicts that invariably happen when two people come at a problem with very different perspectives. And because we haven't given people the tools and the power collectively to work those things through, you can begin to understand why a leader would say, thanks very much. I'm going to go sit in my office and write this thing because it's a lot safer and easier than trying to figure out how to work on something with somebody else, right? I think part of it is we have to rethink the way we train ourselves to lead ourselves and lead each other.
Well, that's a really great point. It makes me think about a conversation I had with a senior leader who I used to work with in my last corporate role. And he was telling me how in his previous role, he led a very large team. He had a good 30 people under him. And now he's in an individual contributor role, same level of seniority, but no people to lead. And the first thing he said to me when we had a catch up call was, Rebecca, it's so nice to just do the stuff I love and, do all the things I did early on in my career before I started leading people. And I had to deal with people's emotions and performance reviews and things like that. And he said the hardest thing for him as a leader in the last year before he moved to this new role was dealing with people's emotions.
Yeah.
And I think we forget about what everyone calls soft skills. I think we need to start calling them something else because they're so important. We just don't do that really well. We focus on the technical side of leadership and the tactical side, but not so much on training people how to really deal with people who are humans and they're not robots. They have emotions, they have feelings, they have fears, anxieties, hopes, dreams. And that's hard because even the best people leaders who have the greatest potential to lead people just aren't equipped to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think when we talk about leaders and we amplify leaders as the important person on the team, we pay them more, we make a big deal about leaders in society. And yet, there's so much research around how the best leaders are also the best listeners. And so to say to somebody, here you are up on this pedestal, and oh, by the way, to do what you do well, you need to step down and put other people in place so that you can listen and understand and figure out what motivates them. Well, these are very conflicting skills that without a chance to practice those skills, without a chance in a low risk way to make mistakes, then of course it's going to create a sort of a natural fear of emotions, of conflict, of all the things that happen when you put people together. This whole idea of working in teams, whether you're the leader or a team member, it's messy. It's like the sausage making part of the workplace, because if teams had something easy to do, you wouldn't need a team. It would just be done, right? As we have technology doing more and more and more of the easier stuff, we're going to face harder and harder and harder challenges that require more attention to those skills of engaging with each other, of listening, of giving each other the benefit of the doubt. I mean, that's not something we talk about a lot in the context of work, and yet it's critical to a well-performing team, is to give people grace, to make mistakes, and to come back again with an improved approach to how to do things. I think at the end of the day, it's more critical that we have the collective soft skills, and I'm with you. Soft makes them seem so underwhelming, and yet they're probably the most critical skills there are. They're also the most generalizable skills, right? Those are the skills you learn that you take to your next job. But if we don't figure out how to develop collective skills in a safe and comforting way, then we're not going to be able to solve some of these bigger technological challenges.
Talk to me a little bit about how you address this with your work at Reflection Point. You're talking about this collective set of skills. You focus a lot on using powerful stories to build bridges, to flip perspectives, to deepen shared understanding in the workplace. And this is supposed to enhance team dynamic and create this collective ability to work together as a dynamic team. So can you tell us a little bit more about how that works at Reflection Point?
Absolutely. So as you said, at Reflection Point, we bring powerful stories, sometimes books, mostly short stories. They're usually quite short. And we bring them with an expert facilitator into teams and groups that come together. And the concept is to use that story as a jumping off point. It's an opportunity to take a step back, to reflect, to pause a little bit, and to get engaged with something that is different from your work, although adjacent to your work, because we pick the stories based on the challenges that teams are thinking about or facing. But by looking at something that's a little bit different, nobody's an expertise, you level the playing field. I always say to people, you leave your position at the door and you engage with each other and a story in a really generative, human kind of a way. And by doing that, it gives you the chance to do that practicing I was talking about a few minutes ago, right? So you practice disagreeing. We bring stories where maybe people see something, everybody will see something different, but maybe there's a character that rubs people the wrong way. I see that character as a hero and you see that character as a villain. So within that, we can actually start to engage with different ideas and say, what does this mean? And how do we think about what these stories mean? So by asking each other questions, by challenging our assumptions around what a story means, we have this low risk way of practicing these skills I was telling you about, listening, asking questions, challenging your assumptions, disagreeing with respect, and widening the circle of empathy, really being open to the fact that when you have 10 people sitting in a circle, you have at minimum 10 different ways of looking at something, if not more, right? And how many times do we assume that there's one truth without taking a step back and saying, wait a minute, there are so many different ways of looking at this. Is this a more complex problem than we think? And so for the teams that work with us, and we've worked with teams in sectors all, from manufacturing to financial services to professional services to every kind of sector that you can possibly imagine, high tech, hospitals, etc. But what you get is you get a team of people who can take a step back and say, wow, if the story generated this kind of an understanding of each other, how now do we take that understanding and apply it to our work? What does that look like? How does it feel? So sometimes it's as simple as one person said, now that I got to know somebody in Reflection Point, I'm much more comfortable giving them feedback, even though it's uncomfortable feedback, because I know them, they know me, and they know that my heart is in a good place and that I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. We learned that about each other when we did this story work together, and now we can leverage that in the workplace. But it can also be, a way for a team to say, okay, now let's really grapple with something difficult because we know how to disagree with each other. And we can do it in a way that, as another client says, separates our ideas from our egos. So we can throw our ideas on the table, but protect our egos from hurt so that we can really work together to figure out what the best idea is going to be for this thorny problem we have in the workplace. So it's a very powerful tool that different teams use in different ways. But what it does at its core is it gives you a chance to pause, reflect, and remember that in the collective, we have so much wisdom that we sometimes rush too fast that we don't get a chance to tap into. And by realizing that we have such different perspectives and such different experiences, that we can tap into that wisdom in really productive and generative ways.
But it's such a cool concept, and I think the fact that you're using literature, and in many cases it's fiction, right? But these stories have real life scenarios that are comparable to what we experience in the workplace. So it's a great way to take something that we're not emotionally connected with, or we can come in with an unbiased point of view and really talk about the character's problems and how it relates to what we're experiencing. So how do you ensure that teams walk away from your workshops and are able to confidently sustain what they've learned and keep that strong team dynamic?
Well, that is the biggest challenge of any kind of learning, is how do you take away what you've learned and have it change you or transform you in some meaningful way so that it really plays a role in everything that you do. And I like to think of this as it's a shift from thinking linearly, like what are the 3 takeaways that I can apply tomorrow, to a kind of a connect the dots thinking, to having something in the back of your mind that you say, wait a minute. I remember when we had this conversation about this guy who was an overzealous character in a story. I don't want to be that guy. Let me take a step back and say, how can I do something differently? Right. So
Mm.
to give you an example, there's a story that we've used written in the 1940s by the great Chinua Achebe, who's a Nigerian writer. It's called Dead Men's Path. And it's a very short story, 2 pages, basically 3 pages. And it's about a young, incredibly enthusiastic headmaster who goes into a new school and wants to change the school. And what he doesn't realize is by changing things very quickly, he bumps up against traditions and he bumps up against the ways of doing things. And of course, those traditions, sometimes they feel like brick walls, right? So I don't want to spoil the ending, but he certainly learns that change doesn't happen overnight. I've had discussions about that story with groups of leaders who've stopped and said, wow, all the ways in which we have pushed to barrel something through because we knew it was the right thing to do without bringing people along. Now that we see this story, we can see so clearly the truth of that mistake. This is a piece of fiction, but the truth, the fundamental truth of human nature is that change is slow and that you can't push change through faster than people are willing to be changed. And so by having a way to abstract that idea and then invite people to bring it back into their own lives, it becomes a very powerful metaphor for the kinds of things you have to remember to do if you want to be successful going forward in your lives. And so one way to keep it alive is to have people do this more than once. There's no learning that's one and done, and Reflection Point is no exception. So, we really want teams to do this over time and to build that muscle. I always say we would never ask a sports team to only play and never practice, but we ask business teams to do this all the time. They got to go out, they got to solve the big problems, they got to move to the next one, they got to solve that problem, and they never take a step back and practice. But sports teams practice constantly. They're always practicing. What did we learn from that last thing? How do we practice and go forward to the next one? This is a way that business teams can practice examining problems, looking at them from different lenses and angles, and thinking about what that teaches them for the future.
I love that example of sports teams versus businesses. I completely agree. I mean, I can think of examples in my own corporate experience where, we just go from one thing to the next, and there's no real flexing the muscle, exercising the muscle over and over.
You said something about characters, and I think what will resonate deeply with you, with your work on empathy, is that there are very few real life chances that we have to just step into the shoes of another person and say, wow, if we were this person, what kind of decision would we make? How might we do things differently? How does this resonate with us personally? Characters in stories let us do that. It's incredible practice for being able to say, what if this were me? What would I do differently? How does this relate to something I've already experienced? How did I do it? And how does it compare to what the character did? There are so many ways in which reading fictional stories, and I forget who said it now, but somebody once said that fiction is what you have when nonfiction, when the truth doesn't work anymore. Fiction is the truth. That really gives us that thinking. But fictional stories give us this incredible opportunity to practice stepping into other people's shoes and to really imagining ourselves in their lives and trying to understand better what drives other people.
I hope you enjoyed the first part of my conversation with Anne. Don't forget to tune into next week's episode where Anne and I will do a live role play session using a poem by Philip Levine. The session will be similar to the sessions she conducts with teams to address a unique problem a team is facing. See you next week. This podcast is designed to help busy business leaders create an inspired and engaged workforce. I am building a community of like-minded leaders and experts who all share the same passion, taking care of people at work. Whether you are a small business owner or work in a large corporation, you belong in this community. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you know someone who I should interview or you have topic requests, please connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.